I begged God, my family begged God to save my nephew's life. I was 100% confident God was going to heal him.
God, don't you see this as harming me? Like, why aren't you taking away?
And I'm just going to say it. It's not fair that God would ignore or God would grant this person and not my prayers.
Look at the wicked. They're flourishing. They don't even love you, God. They don't even think that you're real, and they're wealthy.
Prayer is not about getting the answers you want. Do you ever feel like your prayers are just not getting through? Maybe you've prayed and just nothing changes, or even worse, you've prayed and everyone else around you's prayers are being answered, but not yours. Yours are being ignored. We've all felt that way, and that's what we're talking about today on the Live Change podcast. Jason and Joanna, welcome. Today we're talking about unanswered prayers. This is a big one because I think a lot of faith is challenged in our time of need, our time of desire to talk to God and have him answer our prayers. And it's really difficult when we pray and pray and pray, and it feels like there's crickets on the other side. It feels like there's no answer, or maybe there is an answer and we hate it. And let's talk about that today. Have you guys ever had one where you guys prayed and the answer was no? Or maybe prayed and prayed.
Absolutely.
And
100%.
And the answer was silence too. So like,
Yes. He does always pick up the phone. He does not always answer yes. I don't understand that.
Yeah.
I don't understand. I've shared with our church. I begged God. My family begged God to save my nephew's life in October. And it didn't happen. And I was 100% confident God was going to heal him. And he passed. And I don't understand it all. I do not understand it all. And that's okay. And I've been angry and I've been confused. I've been all that too. And I can talk to God.
You've been angry at God?
Well, frustrated maybe is a better word, because it doesn't make sense. And I see the heartache that my sister and, her husband have gone through, and I see the loss of siblings, with their oldest brother, and that grieves me. And so, yeah, I'm frustrated because I know that hurt and pain, and I go, God, you know that hurt and pain, so why? I don't understand it. So I can't make sense of it. So yeah, that was unanswered.
Yeah.
And it wasn't safe. It wasn't like, I wasn't praying like, your will be done. Yeah. It wasn't like, sometimes you can back away from a prayer and kind of like, I want them healed, but whatever you want, God. And I actually think I think that's right. Like, I don't think that's a wrong way to pray. I'm just trying to say I wasn't praying that way for those 5 days that Noah was continuing to get worse and worse. So it was, you're going to heal him. I believe this. I know you're the one who, you can speak a word, Jesus, and you can heal, and you're going to do that. And I believe that. We're begging you for that. We're going to give you the glory. It wasn't like so that makes it sometimes harder.
And I think you lead us to our next question, which is like, is there a difference between unanswered prayer and prayer that is maybe it's an undesirable outcome?
Yeah.
Like what's the difference there?
Yeah, some of that I think is actually, for myself, I can kind of attach it back to like heart posture. And so it's funny you said like God always picks up the phone, but what I choose to hear or encounter sometimes can be the posture in which I'm choosing to do that. And so even if it's silence, that doesn't mean it's emptiness or that like he's not there. And so, yeah, I think for me, some of that is actually how I show up to the conversation. And if my heart is soft or hard that day, or if it's the same prayer I've prayed for 5 years or not, or, just like the manner in which I'm showing up to like engage in that relationship, which would be true actually about other relationships. And so that would also be true if I'm showing up to talk to Kevin or the kids or a friend. I think your heart posture can affect then how you hear in conversations like that too.
Okay. So what is it ultimately though, when you hear nothing, you're saying that God's listening, but his answer can literally be nothing. Like you pray for peace about something, and it's like you never have that peace. That peace just doesn't come. And it's like, is that an answer? say to the person, there's a woman out there that's praying about her husband, and her husband is not kind. And she prays every morning that God would soften his heart. And every morning the heart isn't softened. Or maybe it's a guy that is like, please let my job, like he's praying every day, like, let my job be less hostile. Let me like my job. Let me find peace about this. And each and every morning it still stinks. Or maybe it's a kid that's like, I pray and pray and pray that God will help me be at school, and, maybe at school or college, and, I pray that I'm not going to get bullied, and the bullies keep coming. What do you say to those people where it's like, I'm praying, but, nothing changes?
Yo, man, I would say that's really, really hard. And I'm sorry that that's been your experience. And I would also say this, your praying sometimes God may give you clarity and wisdom in the midst of it. So if you keep praying that you have peace with your job or whatever, and you don't have any peace, God may be leading you in those prayers to go, it's time to move on to another thing. So, I don't know, I don't struggle personally with as much with the change other people thing. Like, like I just really, want my boss to be nice or whatever, like I'm praying God, because, people at the end of the day are responsible agents of their own life. So I don't want God. I don't want to be a puppet. So I got to be real careful. If I don't want to be a puppet, I can't just expect God to pull the marionette strings for other people either. So like that's a sword that cuts two ways on that one. And so like I might get what I want, and it mean you're giving up something else, your freedoms or whatever. So I don't wrestle with that one as much. I wrestle more with the circumstance, the things that really I truly know that only God can do. I would take you back to the Garden of Gethsemane, and I would just say Jesus himself prayed multiple times for circumstances to change, and it didn't. And he got a no on that. That's light. This is life, and it's really hard. And I'm sorry. But I also know that God was drawing a much bigger purpose in this, and that without that moment, we wouldn't have the cross and the resurrection, and there was a much bigger thing happening that sometimes you don't understand until much later.
So, like, look at someone like the Apostle Paul. So, like, Paul, a later follower of Jesus, he prayed and prayed and prayed for God to remove something. We don't know what it was, but he prayed and prayed and prayed. God never took it away. And I would argue Paul was praying with a ferocious amount of faith. And I would argue that Paul, of all people, deserved to have it taken away. And it didn't. And is that just part of it? Is sometimes the answer is no?
Sometimes the answer is no, yes. But again, it helps me to think through, again, a good parent, because it helps me just kind of make the connection. I don't give my kids everything they want, because I know other things they don't know. I know that certain things they want that they don't even know will rot their teeth. And there are times I say no because I'm a good father. But to them, it looks like I'm a mean dad, or it looks like I'm a withholding dad, or it looks like I'm a not understanding dad from their perspective.
Yeah.
So
Joanna, does that bring you peace?
Well, I just think it's just really hard. And that's why it is funny. Right, we're here earthside trying to comprehend things that are just really hard to understand.
Yeah,
and so with the analogy you just used, also thinking out about a parent, if there was something harming my kid, I have to imagine I'd try to do anything I could do to stop that harm. But I think that's even what you're sharing a little bit, Chad, of the tension, that it's like, well, then it's like the prayer is, God, don't you see this is harming me? Why aren't you taking away? And I think to what you shared earlier, Jason, I don't know. And that stinks, and that's hard. And I know if I've had seasons, and I mean, I still have things in my life that it feels like I'm waiting on an answer, but it also feels like the answer is already no. And I just have to be okay with that, even though it's still a really hard and painful thing. Yeah. And so, I don't know why. And on this side of heaven, I don't know that gets explained.
Yeah. But what about the not fair? And I'm just going to say it. It's not fair. And this word has been said to God probably just about more than anything else is fair. And you have people that are praying, and I have people that are praying, And I think I've said this on the podcast in the past. I had two friends, both with the same kind of cancer, both prayed with ferocity, both families prayed with ferocity, both expectant that God will heal. And this person lived and this person died.
Yep.
And then you have like that person got the job they wanted, and that person has the family they wanted, and that kid, you know, I know the parents have been praying over that kid since they were a baby, and they still went off the rails.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that? It's not fair that God would ignore or God would grant this person and not my prayers. And how do you reconcile that with the fact that God could answer everyone's prayers? He could.
I think fairness is you're back at you're back in transaction land when you start talking in terms of fairness, because you can only determine whether or not something is fair based on you have a predetermined goalpost or moorings, I guess, in a sense. Like you have a predetermined sense of this is the right thing. And so that's the only way you can determine fairness. Now, so that's assuming if you're transactional, I know what the right thing is. The right thing is because I've done this, this, and that. You owe me this. Or how is it? How could it? They don't even, I mean, this is all through the Psalms. Look at the wicked. They're flourishing. The wicked are doing great. The wicked are, they don't even love you, God. They don't even talk about not praying. They don't even think that you're real. And they're wealthy and they're flourishing. And here I am. And so even behind that, so first of all, God listens to that, which is amazing. He can take that. But those prayers usually aren't resolved. It's just like, I got to get that off my chest. And once you get that off your chest, you usually come to a place of going, but God, you don't owe me anything. Like I'm not owed anything. I'm not entitled to anything. That's again, transactional. I just imagine God like a good dad. Like if my kids were, I mean, I do things all the time that my kids think are not fair. They don't think it's fair that Solomon gets to watch Star Wars, you know, at 5 when they had to wait till they were 15. I mean, you know, or whatever. I mean, you know, I'm kind of joking, but you know, that happens all the time. There's things that I just listen. Like I don't even try to answer sometimes. I'm just like, yeah, there's things you know, or I know that you don't know. So I don't think it's wrong to go to God with that kind of stuff. I just think as soon as we do, you should pay attention because you're probably in transactional world at some level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think too, the idea of then that surrender. And so like when it's like you at the center of the universe versus God's plan at the like kind of center of your posture, like I think that then those are two different ways that then you show up in conversations or in thought patterns like that, right? So if we were created in God's likeness for his glory and for his purpose, then it's not always me and what I want and my purpose. And that doesn't mean that God won't hear me. And he says like, bring, you know, your requests, like tell me what you want, you know, and I think he like deeply cares about the big and the small things in our life. But if we look back, like the purpose of our creation and the reason that we were made is to be in God's image to like bring him glory. And so when you get to a very me-centered relationship with God, then it's also very easy to just be seeing, like to see that as a transactional relationship instead of like that bigger picture. Like God's glory and God's purpose.
I think you guys have helped me understand something, which is, Jason, going back to this idea of like Jesus in the garden. And I don't think anyone could have prayed as hard as Jesus prayed in that garden. Like, you know,
no one was connected to their heavenly, to God like Jesus.
And if Jesus got told no, but at the end of his prayer, he said what I don't know if I could have uttered in that moment with such unbelievable stress. He said, your will be done. Mm-hmm. And that's a hard thing to say at the end of prayer, like you said. But the other thing that I'm realizing is I think we have to acknowledge that when we're praying, we're also dealing with a broken world, a bigger story, and other plans. Mm-hmm. I think God has there's a broken world. Mm-hmm. Like hurting people hurt people. And you can pray and pray and pray, and bad things are still going to happen this side of heaven. Mm-hmm. The other thing is there's a bigger story God's doing. And I think that's what Jesus said, but your will be done. He was like, I get there's a bigger story. Your will be done. And then lastly, is there's other plans. I remember Stephanie, and this is, if you have a sick or elderly person and you're praying for their health, sorry to trivialize with telling a story of me wanting a house, but Steph and I prayed and prayed and prayed for a house.
Mm-hmm.
And we prayed and prayed and prayed, and we're like, God, this is your plan. And we see it. We see it. Look at that. I can't believe that's there in the living room. This is what we want. Nope. Lost it. This happened to us 6 times where we invested, and Steph would cry in the car when we found out. And it's like, I have to watch my wife crying because I can't provide the house that she wants and deserves. And I'm praying and praying and praying. But then later, this was an example of other plans. God put us in the house with the community that we needed. He put us in the house with the people that we desperately needed in our life, our neighbors, and just such good has come out of it. But if I had gotten my will, and not his will, the other plans wouldn't have happened. So just talking to you guys, I feel like there's a broken world, a bigger story, and other plans.
I love that that framework right there, and I think that's so true. What you're saying, if you can remember those things, with praying, and I think sometimes we back off asking God specifically for things because we're afraid of what it will mean about our own faith or lack of faith, or sometimes what's it going to say about God. And so we back off asking boldly, and yet he invites us in, Hebrews, it says that we can come boldly before the throne of grace because of what Jesus Christ has done. You can ask specifically, Jesus, we want a child. I think sometimes we back off of that because but what if we don't get pregnant? What's that going to say about God? And wouldn't you want your dearest friend to still let you know those things, even if they can't provide, or even if they won't provide, and so, God, we want that house. That's the desires of the Psalms talk about it's the desires of our hearts to make those things known. And I would just say, don't back down off those. See, that feels very vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And so we play safe, we ask for safe things. God, just give us something that's great for whatever, we play it safe. And that's okay. I just don't think you'll ever understand. See, part of the depth of relationship is also dealing with the pain that comes with it sometimes. Mine and Jenny's relationship is filled with so much great stuff, and it's filled with there's pain too. That's part of the relationship. And because that's usually where intimacy is created. So
yeah, and where trust is built. And so it can be scary to say, like even the child example, right? It can be scary to say that because you're also then trusting that there is a plan. And so then it's like you're inviting someone else into that conversation, and you have to surrender a little bit because you don't know what's going to be on the receiving end of that. And so I think sometimes that self-protection, it's easier to hold it all in or to keep it to yourself or to try to fix it.
I think you nailed it, Joanna. Because I think we're afraid of rejection.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think it's no different than the guy that's nervous to ask the pretty girl to prom.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to ask because she might say no, not even thinking that she could say yes. And
what would that say about me?
Yeah.
What would that say about,
and what would that say about God? And it's almost like, well, I don't even want to ask God.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you were getting at is like, that you don't want to ask because what happens if he says no?
Yeah. That's the surrender. The surrender actually, let's go back to your framework. The surrender is the bigger story. It might not be my story. And the other plans might not be my plans. My plans are, I want the baby.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the surrender is the trust of going, but I realize you may have other plans.
Yeah.
And that feels vulnerable. And so what we do is we back off from, but we can ask for the plans that we would hope for and that we would long for. Again, the desires of our heart, while at the same time holding it open-handed, saying, but I know and I trust that if you have other plans, it's always for my good. It's always for my good.
Last question. So Jason, is there a time where God says no because of something we've done? Is there a time when we actually are affecting the answer to prayers?
Yeah, I think the Bible, the Bibles were very interesting in making the association at times between how we are living and treating others, and I'll use the effectiveness of our prayers. There's seasons in my life where I feel like I'm not hearing from God, and I feel like I'm not close to God. Like I'm talking now, Jason, personally, very personally, and I don't like to do this, but I need to do this where I'm just sitting there going, I think there's sin in my life right now, and I need to confess this. This goes, from a confession standpoint. We can talk about that a little bit later, about what the confession, because that's a way of praying. I need to confess that. So again, it's not like God's being, I think you're right. It's not like God's being petty. I think it's just so common sense. Like, how could you treat someone you're in a relationship with or other people and it not affect your relationship with God? I think that there's definitely, what Jesus did is he brought back when he said, what is the greatest commandment? And he said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. He did something radical and revolutionary. He tied in vertical and horizontal relationships, vertical being relationship with God and horizontal obviously being relationships with other people. And he's saying the two are synced. You cannot be right with God and wrong with others. And yes, it's so easy to separate the two out. And so, hey, as long as me and God are good, I'll treat people however I want to. You can't tell me what to do, whatever. Mm-hmm. And Jesus interlinks the two. So yes, that was a very radical idea. And then the first Christians extrapolate that out even into things like prayer, mm-hmm. like we were just talking about. I think my bigger point is sometimes you should ask if you feel like there's a block, if you feel like you should at least ask God, search my heart. Is there something, am I off somewhere? You should ask that.
What do you say to the person that's struggling to keep going in a prayer life? What advice would you give them? So if someone's struggling because they're like, I just don't know why I'm even praying anymore. If they've got to that point, or they're too nervous to talk to God about it because they felt rejected in the past. What kind of peace would you offer them, and what reassurance would you offer them that God can be trusted and God is good, even though they don't like the answers that God is giving?
I just think that the inventory of gratitude can be such a good place to start when it doesn't feel like anything is going right or anything's been answered. And so, I don't know, like there are times even I feel like in our own family when we're praying, it's like it can be really like seemingly small, dumb, trivial things, right? Where it's just like, thank you for the sun rising today, Yeah. And so, or it can be really great, big, awesome things, right? But I think some of that is just how gratitude changes mm-hmm. your view or your kind of heart posture, can be a really good place to start instead of being in the opposite brain space of that. I
always learned, have we talked about that acronym ACTS, ACTS, about prayer? I always found this helpful. This is kind of when I was growing up. I learned like this framework for prayer. ACTS, ACTS, adoration, confession, thanksgiving, supplication. And so starting, like if you don't know where to start with praying, adoration is a great place to start. And this is your gratitude thing. Just say, God, thank you for, and not just even what you've been given, but for who he is. Mm-hmm. So adoration is also just saying, God, I did that this morning, honestly. That's how I started this morning. And I didn't go through act. I just did that this morning and just say, God, Jesus, you're so holy and you're so good. And you're just gracious to me. And I'm just adoring him. C is confession. And I did that this morning too. And just said, search my heart, bring out some stuff right now. If I've got some stuff I need to confess, the way that I spoke to my husband, my wife, the way that I said that I did that thing. I was just so rude to that person in the grocery store, whatever, right? It's going to bring that, confess it, right? Those are little things, right? So that's confession. T is thanksgiving. So adoration is more about God, who you are. Thanksgiving, the T is about God, what you've given me. Thank you for my family. Thank you for another sunrise. If that's all I can get to, thank you that I'm here talking right now. Mm-hmm. That's all I can say right now because I'm pretty upset about other things. And then S is supplication. Is kind of a fancy word. That just means bringing your needs. Think of like supply. Like, God, I need you to supply on my needs here. Like, here's some things that are weighing my heart down. Or for other people. I want you to supply for, I'm thinking about my dad right now. And God, I pray that you would provide for him, whatever, right? I always found that a very helpful framework for where to start. But I find it interesting that it interwoven before you ask anything is adoration and thanksgiving mm-hmm. and posturing our hearts. I would say, Chad, going back to your original question, if you're getting to the place where you're sitting there going, I don't even know why I ask anymore. What I would just probably gently challenge you to consider is even framing it that way is transactional. So you're again, because you're assuming you should be getting something, or else you wouldn't be feeling, why am I praying if I'm not getting anything? Do you see, like, it's very subtle, but even behind that is the idea that the point of prayer is to get something. It's not. The point of prayer is not to get anything. The point of prayer is to engage with your Heavenly Father who loves you and wants a relationship and wants to hear from you. That's like, stop. End of sentence. That's the point. And so just be careful sometimes. I mean, it's helpful for me because I get that way too. And it's usually just an indicator light. So just don't judge it. Just say, if I start to feel that way, oh, am I treating God like a vending machine right now? Like I'm trying to get something out of him. And if so, get to the C and ask and confess that and say, God, I'm sorry. I've treated you like you owe me something. And I've made prayer more about a transaction than relationship. And I'm sorry for that.
It makes me think of the story of King David when he prayed for the life of his son.
Yes.
And he prayed and he prayed and he prayed and he ripped his clothes and he put ash on his face, which
I think for 8 days, right?
Yeah.
Prayed and fasted.
And then God ultimately was like, no.
His son died.
And then
he was praying that his son would live because he was very sick.
And then the next day, David got up, took a shower, and still trusted God. And God calls King David a man after his own heart.
Yep.
So it's about recognizing the relationship with God is the most important thing, and recognizing that God's plans are bigger than yours, and this life on earth is shallow and short compared to the grandeur of God.
If you want to learn how to pray, I'd go to two places. I'd send you to two places. Go to the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 6, and 7, and in particular, look at the Lord's Prayer. But he also in there talks about praying for our enemies, loving our enemies, praying, blessing them, and all that. So there's prayer interwoven throughout the whole thing. Mm-hmm. But go to the Sermon on the Mount. The second is read the Psalms. Just read the Psalms. Read them again and again and again. The Psalms are prayers. And if you don't know what words to use, read the Psalm out loud as your prayer. And you just prayed. Mm-hmm. Like those were actually written down as prayers that the community of faith would read together to pray. So sometimes you need to borrow other people's words, borrow the Psalms, but that will teach you, Psalms will teach you how to pray.
That's great. So hopefully everyone took away from this episode that we don't have amazing answers. We struggle and wrestle, being in ministry the same as everyone else does. We have prayers that are answered. We have prayers that are unanswered and seem silence on the other end. And we have prayers that are answered no, and it hurts. But today has helped me understand that prayer is not about getting the answers you want. It's about getting the God you want. It's about getting the relationship you want. And I think that's huge. So you may not like the answer God gives you. You may not, be happy about it. But in the end, you can trust God and know that he's good. As always, we ask that you like, share, subscribe, and leave comments on the podcast. And remember, now that your life changed by Christ, go live that change out.